Okay, so now comes what can only be described as a Monash trifecta. So first we have Professor Bruce Scates, Director of the National Centre for Australian Studies at Monash. Bruce.
Well, building on the horse racing analogy, we've just had some horse races in Melbourne and they have set the pace for me. I've allowed 3 minutes for this lightning presentation and happily I have 3 ARC grants in train at the moment and I hope to say something a little bit about each of them. They all have to do with war and remembrance and I thought it might be appropriate on the eve of Remembrance Day to introduce my talk with a symbol of remembrance, a poppy, not poetry but a prop. Now, challenging as it may be, we should view this plastic poppy as an historical artefact. It's quite unlike the first poppies produced by disabled soldiers in the 1920s and used to raise money for those crippled by war. This particular poppy was manufactured en masse in China, and I purchased it for $2 at the $2 shop in Albany. It was overpriced. And that in itself tells us a great deal, I think, about the changing contours of war remembrance in this country. As we embark on the centenary of Anzac, we will see more and more of the commodification of Anzac, its packaging by the mass media, by commercial interests like that enterprising $2 shop, and by conservative governments intent on justifying new military engagements overseas. What Albany showed us a couple of weeks back is that the Great War is now being reinvented as a spectacle. It included fireworks, pop bands and light shows. My poppy here may be a symbol of remembrance, but I'd like to remind you of a longer literary tradition tonight. Poppies are also surely a symbol of forgetting. They're the opiate that lulls us all to sleep. Like many historians of commemorative culture, I'm interested then in what we forget when we remember war, particularly the Great War. In that light, the projects I've undertaken are an attempt at historical recovery, as indeed was my earlier work on labour history and descending traditions. It's in the same vein. The current Discovery Grant considers the changing landscapes of war memory and pilgrimages, in particular to battlefields and cemeteries overseas. One linkage grant is a social and environmental history of soldier settlement in New South Wales, and the other, a much more expansive project, is looking at the history of Anzac Day right across the globe. But all these 3 projects have 3 things, I think, in common. They're all a product of partnership. Industry partners, most notably the Department of Veterans Affairs, but our partnership is certainly not a very musical one at the moment. Partnerships with cultural institutions, the National Archives, the National Museum, the keepers of our nation's stories. Partnerships with commemorative stakeholders like Legacy, who in fact produce poppies like these. And most important of all, international partnerships, and I refer here to the teaching and research relationship that Monash has established with Turkey's Gallipoli University, the Historial de la Grande Guerre in Peronne, and of course in Flanders Field Museum in Belgium. The Great War was never just about us. The second distinguishing feature of this work, I think, is methodological innovation. Historians, of course, are creatures of archives. We recover the past through the written narratives that have survived. I've been fortunate in that these projects draw on new archives that for the most part have been completely neglected by historians. Land Department files only just released by state records, and a vast, virtually untapped reservoir of repatriation records. And as my colleague Elle Thompson and John Maynard are well aware, these repatriation files tell us a story we just didn't hear in Albany. The story of men and women who returned from war, the gassed, the blind, the crippled, the insane. In my work, what I'm trying to do is triangulate sources, draw on repatriation records, land files, military archives, to create, I hope, a more complex and a more nuanced historical narrative. And in doing so, I've tried to step beyond the comfortable boundaries of the archives. Through oral history and through in-depth personal surveys, I've tried to assess the changing impact war has had across generations and to chart changing historical sensibilities as well. Thirdly, and can I say this most importantly, none of this work, none of it is undertaken alone. All of these projects have a strong collaborative quality, and I believe, as I'm sure many of you do here tonight, that the future of the social sciences lies in exactly that scholarly collaboration. So whilst I am honoured, of course, to be elected to the Academy, I take this opportunity to acknowledge the contribution of those I've worked with in the past and those I look forward to working with in the future. And finally, can I follow the example of two of my fellow newbies tonight and acknowledge Gough Whitlam, not just for the chance to attend university either. The first act of the first Whitlam cabinet, cabinet of two, I believe, and I think Gough said it was the best ever cabinet in our history. The first act of that cabinet was to release Australia's draft resistors from prison, one of whom was my brother. His courage in opposing that war, that great dissenting tradition, is a tradition and a voice I think we need to hear today. Thank you.